In this book of the Old Testament, which we're seeing today as we walk down Royal Route 66, we have a beautiful love story, and the book is called the Book of Ruth. It's the key figure in the Old Testament who is a pagan woman. By God's love and by God's grace, she becomes the great-grandmother of Israel's greatest king, David. Now think about that for a moment. Here's a nation that the people of Israel despised, and God, by his grace, brings Ruth from Moab to Bethlehem by a series of experiences that we'll talk about in just a moment. And she becomes the great-grandmother of Israel's greatest king, David, who was also born, of course, in the city of Bethlehem. Ruth was a woman who met her husband through Elimelech and Naomi as a couple moving from Israel because of a famine into the land of Moab across the River Jordan. And there, their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, married two Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And so when the famine got worse, or perhaps because of an accident or military experience, we don't know for sure, but Elimelech died. Then Mahlon and Chilion died. And so here was this widow left with her two widows who had been married to her sons, and she decides, God has dealt with me in a tragic way, and I'm going to return to my homeland, back to the city of Bethlehem. But by this time, Naomi has suffered a great loss, these three key persons in her life, and she feels bitter. She feels that God has perhaps abandoned her. She's not a very good example of a God follower for Ruth to go with. But Ruth has decided, because of whatever experiences she's had with the family and with Naomi in particular, I'm going to go with you back to Bethlehem. And the story illustrates for us that God changes the old and makes it new. Paul would make it clear in his writing that it wasn't because of the physical lineage of Abraham that a person would be a Jew, a person who could share in the promised land, but it was because of the faith of Abraham that counted for righteousness. And so Ruth has this experience. She says to Naomi, don't make me leave you. Let me go with you. Let me experience your God. Your land will be my land. Your city will be my city. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. She made a total commitment to this new life to share with Naomi, her mother-in-law. And there's a lesson for all of us here. It doesn't matter where you were in your life or what you have been, where you've been born. It matters what you choose to follow in your life when it comes to blessing. The circumstances in Moab could have tempted Ruth to find a man to redeem her in Moab. That is, to find a husband who could protect her, provide for her, give her a home, maybe other children. But Ruth was not willing to jump into security. She was ready to take a risk and to go with Naomi to a place that she had never seen before, but she knew it was called the house of bread and praise. And so when she and Naomi came back to Bethlehem, then God was ready to open a new door for her. And this new door came about through her contact with someone called a kinsman redeemer. Boaz, who eventually redeems the livelihood, the land of Naomi, and also redeems Ruth as a part of that deal, becomes an example of Christ. He gives her the new place in his line and in her life. And so the title of this person in the Old Testament is the kinsman redeemer. Ruth needed someone to rescue her from the old life that she knew, and Boaz became that redeemer, that kinsman redeemer. So he was an example of Christ, who is our kinsman redeemer. When you read the Hebrew Bible, you will find that the book of Ruth follows the book of Proverbs. And when you do, you will see that Ruth, a woman of noble character, also is described as this woman of great strength in Proverbs chapter 31, this woman of noble character. The kinsman redeemer is an interesting concept in Israel. When a person who was a relative was given the opportunity, that person should raise up children to the nearest relative and also to redeem their land. So when Boaz discovered that Ruth was the daughter-in-law of Naomi after she had been gleaning in his fields, he went to this next relative and sat down with 10 men in the city, kind of a local jury who would make decisions about practical matters like land and sometimes like wives. And when he explained the situation to this next relative, he said, "You can redeem this land." And I think the relative was probably very thankful that Boaz had told him about this piece of land. He said, "I'll redeem it." And Boaz says, "Oh, by the way, when you decide to redeem the land, you also redeem Ruth the Moabitess, who's returned to this land, and she's the daughter-in-law of Naomi." Well, at that point, the next relative in line said, no, I got kids. I don't want to have my inheritance messed up by having a new wife, so I'm not going to redeem it. And so, as was a symbol in that day, he took his shoe off and gave it to Boaz, and that's why the symbol of the kinsman redeemer was called in the vernacular the house of him who has his shoe loosed. So Boaz became the redeemer by the symbol of the contract that existed between the next in line relative and Boaz, who could step in and be the substitute kinsman redeemer. Well, it's an interesting story because it has drama, it has intrigue, it has Naomi's instructions to Ruth, which are a little risky, and Boaz's treatment of her in a gentlemanly way before the opportunity comes for him to choose her as his wife and later on to become a part of Naomi's family as well. When you read the book of Ruth, there are 4 simple and straightforward chapters that focus on Ruth's action after the death of her husband in Moab. First, she decides to stay with Naomi. She identifies with her God and comes to Bethlehem. You and I may be fortunate enough in our lives too to have someone who influences us in such a way that we want to say to that person, "Your God will be my God." That is, that witness is so powerful and so strong that it invites us to become part of the family of God as well. So the key verse is in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, where Ruth says to Naomi, "Entreat me not to leave you, nor from coming with you. Don't make me turn back. Let me follow you. Let your people be my people, your God, my God." And so she and Naomi came back to Bethlehem. It reflects her true commitment to the God of Israel that Naomi had revealed to her by her life. And so Ruth becomes dedicated to taking care of Naomi, not just as a mother-in-law, but as a guide in the faith. And as Naomi instructs her, in spite of her weakness and calling herself bitter, Naomi reflects the growth that she returns to in Bethlehem and begins to share some of that instruction with Ruth. So she rests in the instructions that Naomi has given her, and she learns to live in expectation of what God's plan may be. Now, as a foreigner, Ruth was not able to go out and get a job easily in the land of Israel, but God made a plan to take care of foreigners. He said, when they come in, allow them to work your fields. Leave a little bit along the edges so that what you glean is not every last drop of the straw or the wheat. Leave something for those who have no place, no home, the homeless. Leave something for them to pick up and to be used to sustain themselves as well. So Ruth would go along the edge of the fields, and Boaz saw her doing this, and he asked who she was, and he finally said to those who were reaping, leave a little extra so that she and her mother-in-law can be taken care of. So God blessed them and used the principle to take care of those who were foreigners in the land, to take care of Ruth and Naomi. And finally, Ruth is rewarded not only for her mother-in-law, but with a new husband. I don't know, it's a very good idea for you to go out and glean in a field and hope you'll find a husband out there. There are probably better ways to do that in our society, but this was the way God planned for Ruth and Boaz to come together and form a new home. The elements in the book of Ruth are real. First, the move to Moab because of a famine. Sometimes the things that you can't explain and I can't explain affect not only where we live, why we live there, and some other implications for our living. That was the situation when Elimelech and Naomi moved to Moab. The grief of losing 3 loved ones cannot be hidden. Elimelech, the senior man, died. His 2 sons died. And here are these 3 women left alone with no support, no one to protect them. Widows were left in a difficult position in the society, both of Moab and of Israel at that time. And Naomi experiences all of this grief, and she says, oh, don't call me blessed. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. And she wails against God. But Ruth's confession of faith in her God and the other decision that Orpah made in staying in Moab, Ruth says, let's go back to Bethlehem. Let's experience the blessings, and your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. So sometimes our feelings keep us from a clear witness to the power of God in our lives. Naomi wasn't a very good God follower at this point, but Ruth saw the opportunity for being blessed if she stuck with Naomi. And so God used that decision to bring about her faith, and it brought hope to Naomi and the rewards that God had promised. The ancient rules about the kinsman redeemer were followed. Boaz treated Ruth with respect, and God blessed them with his fulfillment. So the final lesson for the book of Ruth today is nothing is better than that. When things don't go the way you want them to, when grief disrupts your life, trust God. Allow him to lead you and guide you, as Ruth did with Naomi, and to come to Bethlehem and there to discover God's plan for you and for me. God's way is always the best way. Ruth discovered that, and we remember her as the great-grandmother of King David. It's a great story. If you're looking for a woman to identify with and to say, God bless me like you blessed Ruth, this is a good place to start in the scripture. And may he bless you with the same kind of life that Ruth enjoyed.